good morning, everyone, and we're delighted that you could join us for our second in the CanEx webinar series here on Zoom. I'm very pleased to bring you this second iteration of this new dispensation for us as an organization. The cultivation seminar went extremely well. We had fantastic feedback and a dynamic panel that really delivered the goods. And I'm personally very, very excited about what we're going to bring to you today. We have an extremely talented panel, very experienced, great expertise in understanding the global landscape from an investment perspective. And I'm going to hand over, right before I hand over to my good friend Javier Hasse, who's going to guide us through this process today. I just want to give a special, thanks to all the companies who have made this possible. And those include Ridgetop Lighting, Green Stripe Naturals, Zimmer & Company, High Vibes Jamaica, Marijuana Business Daily, Latinas Cannapreneurs, Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Silo Wellness, and Mita out of Arizona, and It's Not Rocket Science. So without further ado, Javier, I'd like to invite you to do what you do, sir, and take us down this next hour and a half.
I mean, I'm very excited. We got great speakers today. We got Barrington Miller from the Canadian Securities Exchange, Matt Nordgren, who's a founder and managing partner for the Arcadian Fund and Arcadian Capital Management. Please correct me if I get any of the titles wrong. You know, people change a lot. So I'm off the top of my mind. Wayne Isaacs, CEO of Green Stripe Naturals, and William Muecke from Artemis Growth Partners. And I mean, let's get going. This is a very interesting panel. People are all over the world. You just heard from Doug. He's in Jamaica. Matt is in the US. I'm in Argentina. Barrington, I think, is in Canada, if I'm correct. William is in London, and Wayne is also in Canada. In Jamaica. So maybe I think we could start, introducing a little bit what's the situation for cannabis business and investments in each one of your countries, what you're seeing. And then go into some trends and things we're seeing in the global markets and in the capital markets specifically. So I'm going to start on my upper left side of my screen. I see Matt. So also a good start. What's the situation in the US for cannabis business and investing in general? What are you seeing?
Hey, Javier, thanks for looping me in first. We got a fun hour and a half ahead. And as you said, I think what is really interesting about this particular panel is that you have, folks that I think all of us would call on each other for expertise in these particular regions. I mean, this is really kind of fascinating to talk about this topic and this perspective. Arcadian really is focused on North America. We do have some investments in other countries, but this really is our focus. And the United States, people talk about last year, 2019, being a year where somewhere between 15, 16 billion of legal revenue was generated in this world. Of that, United States represents about 11 and a half or 12. And I'm going to be off a little bit here, Javier. I know all you guys know the right numbers, but generally speaking, and then California is about 3.5. So when you look at, getting the scale, that really is why we've been focused here. Also, this is our backyard. So, we just know the market, and I think it's good to frame the world's market, because when we look at opportunities, we really want to know as investors market share, and we want to know what's really going on in different markets based on, things that have actually happened, not just what could happen. And that's how you de-risk an industry and start to attract these institutionals that we know want to be in. So we really are focused on the US just for that reason alone. Tremendous opportunity everywhere else in the world. And when that happens over in Europe and Latin America, I mean, Will's like Arcadian's first call. And when we want to know what's going on in Canada, we're calling Barrington. And frankly, when we want to know anything going on in the entire world, we call Javier. But of course, Doug and our friends in Jamaica. So this panel is going to be great to talk about all that in that perspective. And Arcadian will come actually a little bit more with the United States, North American perspective.
Definitely, yeah. We are definitely seeing a lot of interest in North America for very evident reasons, but the rest of the world is developing fast, and we are moving toward a more traditional industry where different countries will, I think, produce very different products. So, well, what's the situation in the UK? What's the situation with cannabis? Do you see investment opportunities and business opportunities today, or are we a couple of years away? You know.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're voting with our feet. So we did our largest transaction and worked on the acquisition of Bridge Farm Group out of Sundial, which was about an 80 million US transaction. What that play is really a focus on cultivation into production, extraction, ultimately into CBD retail delivery, and then ultimately when it opens up that we can actually produce legally under a license medical cannabis. But the UK is one piece of the world. It is developing. It's probably developing slower, as even all of Europe is developing slower than people had projected, 2 or 3 years ago when we were looking at the explosion in cannabis. And that's frankly a good thing. I think that when you compare what's happening in the US to what's happening here in Europe, the US has really been this opening of markets by referendum, state to state. Obviously, we know it's still federally illegal, but the local markets, state to state, have produced really robust business opportunities, whether it's a medical state or a state that's gone medical and into rec. In Europe, it's almost the opposite process. It's a tops-down process. So here, it's much more focused on the development as it relates to THC cannabis on the medical markets. Germany is really the engine pulling that train right now. But when you compare it to the US, it's a much smaller market today. We look at the demographics, very appealing long-term for Europe, 750 million people represented when you stitch together all of the different countries. But when you look at the revenues that came out of Europe last year, and I'll just use Germany as an example, I think it was under 200 million euro of sales for cannabis. When you compare that to, Matt was just saying, look at California, which is 2 to 3 billion, Europe is dwarfed in size by the activity that's happening in the US. The flip side is being early in Europe, which is where we want to be, is you get to build the value chain. So you get to start picking through the teams and the opportunities, hopefully selecting well, hopefully not going too early, but you're able to see what's been happening sort of in V1 and V2 of cannabis development in Canada and the US, and you can see how that maps towards Europe, although again, in a medical sphere over here versus on a recreational or adult use basis. As a fund, we do invest in the US. I'd say that we're probably more 60% in the US. We invest also in the Caribbean and in Latin America. We actually have a Jamaican investment in Jacana. We're invested in Colombia, so we have 2 plays there, and then we also have Israel, China, and then Europe. So we're a global fund, but we do spend a lot of our time right now in Europe because we see that this is an early market, and it's great to be here when there's not a lot of folks here. And like Matt said, we work collaboratively with both companies and other investors because this is a chance to really build an industry long term. Europe is a piece of that, but it is a global play, and we like to play with good partners.
Yeah, something that I find very interesting is, you said for you're seeing a lot of interest in THC, and actually I was going to ask you, where do you think the largest opportunity lies in Europe? Is it in CBD? Is it in industrial hemp, or is it in THC containing cannabis? Because from what I've seen, you were talking about Germany, and last year it accounted for like 85% of all sales in Europe. So where do you see the largest opportunity? Is it just that maybe THC containing products are having a slow rollout and adoption, or?
I'd say the answer is yes. So across all of those areas, the reality of the THC rollout here, even on a medical basis and in liberalized markets where it is accepted and the state healthcare system is supporting the development and the rollout of the industry, the reality is it's still a really difficult thing for doctors to prescribe. There's no doctor in the world that has gone through a medical school program on cannabis. So everything right now is being taught by the industry. It's somewhat anecdotal. You don't have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and FDA approved drugs other than what is rarefied CBD, which is Epidiolex in the US, or earlier Marinol or Sativex over here that are now also sponsored by the NHS. So again, THC is a very attractive market because we see the liberalized trend happening worldwide, but CBD is a real marketplace. I'd say that the good and the bad of CBD is that it presents a huge opportunity. But there's tremendous confusion still on the consumer side as to what CBD is, how it's used, how it's administered. FSA on the UK side or the EU as it relates to novel foods still needs to be approved. So trying to understand how to consume CBD as an ingestible needs to go through its own protocols and testing. And as a topical, I think that we go through stacks and stacks of companies that put up a CBD play, and we're always trying to say, where's the ground beneath this? Like, where are the customers really coming from? Do consumers understand and resonate with the brand and the opportunity? We know it's going to be a big opportunity. We believe in CBD. We believe in both CBD and other minor cannabinoids outside of THC, but we're still early days. So it is a chance to find good teams and good opportunities and back those good teams, but also a chance to lose a lot of money if you're going in the wrong direction because it is still a nascent industry.
Definitely. And we'll go back to the industrial hemp opportunity a little bit later. I want to move on a little bit to Barrington. Canada, it's the pioneer in all things cannabis business, even though Uruguay kind of beat you to the punch there with adult use, federal legalization. It's Canada where capital markets really took off, and where companies really started to be structured as actual businesses that need to generate money, that need to trade, that need to attract investors consistently, that need to maintain their valuations. What are you seeing now, in the famous 2.0?
It's I was waiting for the 2.0. For one, I just want to say thank you for Douglas and everybody on the panel. We had a pre-call before, and it was just like hanging out with old friends and buddies. So it's a really good opportunity. The CSE has been a player in the capital markets and the access to capital markets for the cannabis industry since day one. We support it. We've seen, and we were talking about it last time, we've seen Cannabis 1.0, and now we're supposedly at 2.0. I'm actually seeing the executive suite of 2.0, where all the founders, all the original, I'm going to call them the old school, the people that brought it from the dark market to the lit market, or whatever you want, however you want to phrase it. It's now changing management. It's now being a lot more corporate in a positive way. Because right now, when you say it's being corporate, you think there's a lot of negative connotations. No, this is actually a good thing. We're still seeing, we thought everyone was saying is cannabis dead? Everyone was asking that. And the answer is a resounding no. Cannabis is not dead. Cannabis is a real industry. It's going through and has gone through the growing pains. What people don't understand or quite comprehend fully is that the pandemic that's going on right now, and we all realize and know that it's a tragedy, and it's affected the world. As far as the cannabis market, it received a label called essential service that couldn't be bought, that couldn't be marketed, that helped validate it, both its efficacy as an industry, for the market participants, for everyone. And so even though March and April was pretty bad, May was fantastic. And then you got into June and July, which is typically the dog days of summer, you're having record levels. So from that exchange point of view, cannabis is far from dead. On the Canadian side, I was joking around at the earlier in 2020, Canadian markets, forget it. Like, just look south, go to the US. Our CEO, Richard Carlton, quickly corrected me and said, no, it is not. Look at the mergers and acquisitions. Look at the people who are talking. And again, these are all signs and life cycles of a growing and maturing industry. So from the Canadian side, from the exchange side, we're still seeing trading, we're still seeing volumes. Where it's coming from, it's a global exchange now. The US, and I'm not giving investment advice. The US is still the big dog in the yard when it comes to this. Canada has about 300,000 medical patients. The state of Michigan has 300,000 medical patients. So there's so much upside, and this is an industry that isn't even federally legal yet
Yeah.
in the United States. So yeah, there's just it's going way up. We're talking to companies in Latin America, of course in Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean. Europe is coming into play. Israel has been, you know, leaps and bounds ahead as far as R&D. They're coming on. So yeah, this is going up and up and up.
So here's and
Wait, don't stop talking, Barrington.
Yeah.
Is anybody your voice? You can just talk about anything. It's so soothing and
Oh.
sounds great. We need a podcast, man.
Oh.
Is anyone else?
Oh, well, we actually do have a few podcasts on the CSU. I'm not plugging, but #finance and aftermarket. Check it out.
Oh man, fantastic! I just want to recognize that. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, thanks,
it's
Matt.
Big Daddy Kane kind of voice.
Very white, you know.
Oh,
just
here we go.
Exactly. So here's a debate that I like to host sometimes, and it's you know, cannabis is deemed essential. Does it make this a recession-proof industry? Does it make it a counter-cyclical, or is it just not correlated with the markets? Period, like reinsurance, for instance, and open to everyone here.
From our perspective, I think we're so early in the industry that right now the growth is just people coming into the market. Like it is the veritable fire hose of demand, because new entry into a certain state, for example, you have people signing up, especially if it's adult use, to have access to a product that they haven't legally had access to for many years. So I think that's one just underpinning of demand. There is significant demand no matter what you want to label it. Beyond that, I think as an essential item, especially for the medical patients, absolutely. People need to have access to their medicine. And so day in and day out, if you have chronic pain, if you have other syndromes, PTSD that you're being treated for using cannabis, you're going to be buying that no matter what the cycle is. And so that's an underpinning that's going to be stable and lasting. And then beyond that, I think that the forces that we're seeing now sort of with COVID is, one is a greater focus on health. And I think that cannabis actually plays, especially on the CBD side, into health. But more importantly, the economics of cannabis are just so robust. So states that are having issues, and I can't think of a state that are not having issues on budget and are having major tax losses because industry has gone away or ceased to exist, especially if you're in tourism or otherwise. That cannabis, the tax revenue has become a huge economic engine to plug a hole in the budget that otherwise would be left unfunded. So I think that the essential aspect is both demand driven, it's medically based, and it's economically driven. And I think it crosses all of those lines. And I think that that demand is only going to grow in the near to medium term. And over the longer term, it's going to remain a steady force.
Other opinions?
I'm nervous calling it recession proof, and for no other immature reason that I don't want to jinx it. It's proven to be, you know, it's coming from a place of healing. It's coming from a place of quality of life, and all of those things. And you know, you separate the rec market from the adult, or sorry, the rec market from the medical market. It's, yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it really. I don't want to call it recession proof, but it's sure acting like it, and it has all the signs.
Well, it's even beyond that, right? Because this is a pandemic, and pandemics are once in 100-year type situations that, you know, happen less often than recessions. And so you can't even prepare for something like this. You just get into it, and then all of a sudden, you know, because a recession is kind of a global macro event, and then or even a regionalized macro event. But then when you get into a pandemic, very special situations. Look at alcohol, for example. Alcohol lost a lot of its areas of revenue just because of the gathering in commercial arenas. Cannabis had a regulated environment such that you didn't really lose your lines of revenue. I mean, in some places it took, you know, different periods of time to get going, but you didn't have to lose any revenue. So even though people are at home and they're buying more alcohol through, you know, delivery and pickup type revenue items, alcohol as an industry lost half of their lines of revenue because of this. And so it's a very unique situation that, you know, and I know all the other funds feel the same way, but these entrepreneurs in cannabis are resilient. They are brilliant at most of the time, and you can't, but they're battle tested. They were ready for this moment. And so we're all riding that wave with them. I mean, it was sort of like, as an industry, we were ready for this, and being essential basically changed the game. But these entrepreneurs were ready. They were ready for pivoting. They were ready for change. They were battle tested, and we were all together in it, such that this is now the result. And so you have to be encouraged. I mean, everybody can't wait till November. These elections, I know we're going to talk about them, but man, are we excited to go back in with a whole bunch of new weapons at everybody's disposal to go back and fight for what they want to fight for in this industry. And there's a lot of different things people are fighting for, but I know we're all so excited to go back out there and say, oh, what about this pandemic here? Look what we did.
Well,
Javier, I don't know anything else, any other industry that's growing at 20% a year as an industry.
Right.
okay, but you have to you know, sort of look at it from a different perspective. I'm fortunate in that I operate both in Canada and Jamaica. I am an investment banker by background, training, education, and experience. You know, so I do have you know, sort of the knowledge of the capital markets and, you know, sort of like the pulse of the capital markets. But, you know, in addressing this as you say, from the pandemic point of view, you know, what has happened here in Jamaica is that, you know, a lot of the retail establishments here in Jamaica are in severe pain, okay? Because a lot of the retail establishments here in Jamaica relied on tourism, okay? And when Jamaica shuts down tourism, you know, for approximately, you know, 3.5 months, you know, what happens is, you know, tourism being 35% of the Jamaican economy, you know, that's a big chunk, right? And a lot of the dispensaries that I have spoken to here in Jamaica, most of them are somewhere around 20 to 30% of pre-COVID levels, right? And tourism is just slowly inching its way back, right? Some of the major resorts here are along the lines of about 20 to 30% of tourism pre-COVID levels as well. So in terms of looking at it from the pandemic perspective, you know, especially, you know, from the essential services point of view, my business in Canada is I own a, you know, I'm a co-owner in a medical clinic in Canada. And the medical clinic that I own in Canada is primarily geared towards cannabis treatment, right? Mostly pain management, anxiety, PTSD, that sort of thing, right? We haven't seen a drop off there in terms of patients ordering, okay? However, on the dispensary side here in Jamaica, where it's more tourist related, we have definitely seen a huge drop off in terms of, you know, in terms of business.
Yeah, good point.
It's interesting that you mentioned, actually, because from my experience in Jamaica, one thing I noticed and you know, it's like most local people still recur to the illicit market, and I know I would, right? It's just, you know, Jamaican ganja is, you know, you just, if you have the right plug, it's great, it's awesome,
right.
It makes you feel good. There's no need to go and buy this Americanized bud in a dispensary. That's like the feeling that some people get. So my question here is, how do you get the population to pivot toward a legal market if there's no large risk, right, in the illicit market in Jamaica, whereas, you know, as compared to, say, the US, right? You get busted buying cannabis
on the street corner.
And yeah, the amount of cannabis you buy in Jamaica too, right? Like if you get caught in California buying illicit weed from someone like on the streets, that a bag this big like you get in Jamaica, you get into big trouble, right? I don't see that particularly happening.
Okay.
So
That's an interesting,
yeah.
That's an interesting point, Javier, because I'll tell you what you know, how do you get the population to pivot to the legal market? It's simple. It's variety and quality, consistency, reliability of that variety and the quality, right? Mm-hmm. Most of what you can get on the street, and I'll give you my disclaimer right now, I've never bought anything on the street, except for testing purposes. You know, what I would say is, you know, the population here in Jamaica, and I've noticed it amongst, you know, sort of like the young up and coming junior executives, you know, mid-management and up, right? They're looking for quality. They're looking for variety, right? You know, they want to walk in and they want to have access to things like vapes instead of buds, okay? You know, they want to have access to tinctures and drops. gummies, whatever the case may be, right? So we're starting to see that segment of the population really pivot towards the legal industry because of, again, the things that I mentioned, the variety, not just a variety of stuff you can roll and smoke, right? Because, you can get all kinds of different strains and you can get different composition of THC versus CBD, in bud form, but it's also the variety of the product offerings as well, such as the vapes and the tinctures and so on and so forth. So we're really starting to see that, but it's happening gradually and it's happening at a certain level. Like I said, that sort of mid-management level and up are really the people walking into the dispensaries. All right, so that's been my experience here.
Yeah,
No, it's interesting. There's some kind of. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add to that because Wayne's spot on. I think that there's also an aspect, one, Jamaica, the domestic market, there's a huge aspirational play. When we invested in Jacana, there was an export model that we were driving. And frankly, the export model has changed to a domestic consumption model because the export model hasn't really happened yet.
Completely, yes.
And the analogy that I had, my previous fund where we were investing World Bank money in Latin America, in Central America, I was living in Costa Rica for many years, and Starbucks opened in Costa Rica. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. We're producing all of the coffee, we're sending it to Seattle, they're basically burning it and sending it back to us, grinding it up and selling it for 1,000 times the price that we sold it to them for. And I was like, they'll fail. And the reality is that you want to go into a Starbucks and it's an aspirational experience. You want to sit there with your laptop and feel like you are, you're achieving the next rung on your own personal aspiration. And there's an element, I think that Jamaica especially, it's a very highly upwardly mobile middle class right now. Exactly. And those consumption dollars are going into higher quality products, whether it's buying higher quality beer, higher quality rum, especially on the enjoyment and social libation side. Higher quality cannabis fits right into that category. And so retailing and all the market forces that you would expect with any other aspirational product falls into that category. And then there's still it's almost like there's a gold card and a green card. There's also a local, more well-priced opportunity that competes directly against the illicit market. And there you compete on, again, quality, but quality at a price. And you also know that what you're smoking or what you're consuming is either, like Wayne's saying, it's in the modality that you want. It's in a gummy, it's in a vape, it's in a tincture or something else. Or if it's just flower, you know that it's not infested with whatever it could be, pesticides, heavy metals, anything else, because it's been tested. So I think that even in Jamaica, where if you remove the tourist market, there's still a really vibrant and robust domestic market to serve. You just have to put your smart marketing hat on and figure out what the market wants. And I think that's exactly what Wayne's doing.
Thank you.
I agree. And sorry, there's someone driving by. This is Argentina for you. Actually, when Starbucks opened down here in Buenos Aires for the first time, people would line up for 2 hours to get coffee. And we have like the best coffee, among other countries, but like we have very Italian-like espresso everywhere. Like there's a coffee store in every corner and people were lining up to get this second-class coffee compared to what you could get it in a regular coffee store because it was aspirational. Now, the evolution of cannabis consumption in the US and Canada, I've seen, as you said, at first, it was more of a certain sectors of society were willing to pay a premium for premium products. But now we're seeing this immersion of value brands, like every major brand and company is trying to create a value brand, right? So how do you implement that next step in Jamaica? Same thing, like how do you see it if what's the evolution look like to you? Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think you select, you have A, B, and C grade product, and you select different grade product for value at a price. You go off of strain as well. Sometimes you can't find the landrace that you want, or the certain strain that you may not have available in the illicit market. It's available in the regulated market. It's again, it's a smart approach. It's just delivering what the consumer wants. Do you want a higher quality product that has a different cannabinoid profile than maybe what you just get in a baggie off the street? And do you want to have maybe some affinity around it? Do you want to have a branding and merchandise that goes to build a brand at a value price that resonates with you, the consumer? So like any other consumer product, it's smart marketing and it's going for delivering at a price what the consumer wants, and just figuring that out is the wizardry that Wayne and other folks driving that local consumption market are experts at, and that's who you back.
Yeah, and you know, in some cases, like I can tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I was at an event at a local outdoor bar, you know, and there was a couple of guys walking around, you know, and they're like, you know, got some high grade for sale. Well, what strain is it? Oh, I don't know, right? You know, like, you know, what's the composition? I don't know. You know, is it like mostly THC dominant, CBD? No, I don't know. You know, and that's what you get from sort of the local guy on the corner, right? It's just something for you to smoke, right? You know, whereas when you go into the more regulated dispensaries, you know, they've got literally menus, right? You know, where they describe the product, you know, they give you the composition, they let you know what the effects could be, you know, all that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, more and more, as William said, the middle class are looking more for, you know, for quality, for variety. They're looking, most importantly, as well, for the consistency and the reliability of that quality, right? Because that's becoming very, very important. You know, bush weed, street side weed, you know, doesn't give you that consistency of quality, right? You know, so when you walk in and you see price ranges from $7 US per gram up to 10,000, up to, not 10,000, I'm sorry, $10 US per gram, right? It's always based on the marketing of something special about that particular bud as opposed to the next one, right? You know, and the consumers are really starting to tune into that. They're really starting to look at, hey, you know what? If I get Jack Herer from X store today, you know, and I get it again a week from now, it's usually the same thing. It's pretty much the same thing, right? If I buy something on the street corner, you know, today, I don't know what I'm going to get tomorrow. Okay. Plus, there's also, you know, sort of the wellness side of it as well, right? You know, where you are screening out things like the heavy metals, the pesticides, the fertilizers, and so on, that people generally don't want to consume as they get more sophisticated in their consumption of cannabis.
We've talked about the industry going and becoming 2.0, and it's going across the board. The the buyers, the customers are now more knowledgeable. They're more aware, not only of the product, but also what they want and choose to put into their bodies. Cannabis has become a CPG game as well. It's, you want to associate that brand with an experience, and not necessarily the experience of what you feel when you do consume it, but the experience of opening it, the experience of smelling it, of it touching all your senses, of reminding you of a place, of a time, of a song, of whatever it is, even a country, because Jamaica is a brand. And when you say it, especially in this industry, you immediately start to evoke certain things. So that's the difference of where cannabis is and where it was. And as far as where it's going, it's just going to continue.
Yep.
There's this, right, for me, there's this like 3.0 that's going to happen with cannabis, if you will, where we will see a more globalized model where some countries will produce low cost input materials, say Colombia, say Jamaica, say whatever. But I envision, you know, cannabis products in the US, many of them containing imported materials, or even, you know, stores selling imported flower. Now, a lot of people tell me, what does that mean? That, you know, Canadian growers and US growers will cease to exist? And I personally envision this segmented market. There will be maybe like craft growers in North America growing indoors or whatever for specific customers, but then a lot of value options. Do you see similar evolution? Do you not expect, like, what's the future for these growers, say in Canada, growing, you know, anti-economically in warehouses at $2 a gram or whatever, when they could be growing at 8 cents a gram outdoors somewhere? Do they have a future, or is it just craft, right?
Can I jump in? I'm stealing an answer. I'm stealing an answer from, again, our CEO, Richard Carlton. And this was, we were talking about it, and it had more of the application was for Europe, and Europe in connection with Africa. So they're along the same timelines. You can grow for like cheap in Africa, are we going to see this massive import of cannabis going from Africa to Malta, GMP certified facility, and then going across Europe? And we start getting into the politics, and you start getting into, let's say, Germany. Well, if I'm a politician and I want to create jobs, am I going to start importing as cheap as possible, or am I going to start buying from local growers and have job preservation and start thinking along those lines? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you're going to do it. And there's a lot of other factors that are taking place. So I don't see it happening quite so cleanly and quite so smoothly as that, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the craft growing, it will continue just simply because, again, of the uniqueness of the product. I'm not sure that the profitability is necessarily there or that it warrants it, but I think it will continue just simply because a lot of these guys, a lot of these breeders, have this amazing ability to sort of put together some products that are unique in the marketplace. And, as we've said here a couple of times during this panel discussion, consumers are becoming more sophisticated. They're actually, in my experience, becoming more demanding, right? So the more products and the greater diversity of products that we can have available for them, I think the more it legitimizes the legal industry, and it gives the legal industry legs to continue. So I think that the craft, sort of growers type will continue simply because, again, of the uniqueness of the product that they bring to the market.
I think the market's going to segment, right? You're going to have traditional flower consumers that want to have super high-end flower. They want to have their watermelon gelato. They want to have their branded product, and the companies that are doing well as they develop new strains or continue to bring back classic strains and just drip that into the marketplace will retain a premium. I think there's going to be a value-placed market below that, whether it's outdoor, greenhouse, or indoor. Sorry about that. So I think that there's going to be a segmentation in the flower market itself. There's going to be a huge bifurcation. So when you talk about everything else outside of flower, going into concentrates, going into beverages, going into edibles, going into tinctures, then it comes down to input costs. I mean, do you think about like how much the price of sugar is that's going into, or caffeine that's going into your Coca-Cola? You care much more about the brand, and then you're just pure commodity on what the inputs are. And that's where places that are purely biomass and driving for the lowest dollar of production will have a business case to survive. So I think that where we invest our dollars, like, do we go into the next warehouse and outside of Toronto? Not sure that's the best place to play. Would we continue to back a high-end flower company that has already demonstrated a flower brand and can extend that in California? Maybe. Will we invest in low-cost producers in Colombia that even though they don't have a domestic market that's really robust today, but we think could be a low input cost to someone else's product elsewhere? We'll back that. Will we get into Africa? Maybe at some point in time, but then you start getting down to what's the maturity of the management team? How well developed are these companies? Who are you investing with? What protections do you have by rule of law? So I think that a lot of different litmus tests then fall into play. But I think as far as the market goes, the market's going to get, we're talking about a market that's, baseball sized today. It's going to be, moon sized in 10 years time. And there's a lot of ground there for a segmentation play that if you're picking the right companies, as an investor, you're going to make a ton of money no matter what modality you play. And I'll go back to our own experience here. We just invested in a business that is doing cultivation in the UK. Would you ever think that the UK, as far north as it is, would be a great cultivator? But the reality is this is going to serve CBD and ultimately in the future THC on a local basis. Yeah. This company also happens to have very low input costs because they have a biomass tariff coming from the government. So effectively their power is free. And so they can compete on an input cost, but they also have relationship with ultimately retailers and with the NHS and with the Home Office that you don't really have outside of the UK. So
Mhm.
Every market's going to have its different complexion, but there's going to be massive segmentation. And I think there's going to be a space for anyone that figures out their business model and runs it efficiently for that segment. But I wouldn't try and compete in a high-end market with a low-end product. Same, I wouldn't take, you know, high-end flour and extract it and stick it into a chocolate.
Matt, you wanted to add anything? I saw you there, like just you're good. So I mean, here's a few weeks ago I was speaking with Magic Johnson, and he got involved in this CBD company, and I asked him why this company? I had never heard about it before. And the first thing he said, like, you know, without a doubt, was it's made in America. It's creating jobs in America. Like, that was his one thing. And to me, like, he like the products that he offers are like, you know, a roll-on with CBD. And it works because it's good CBD. But my question was like, why not get that, like CBD isolate from Isaiah Thomas's company in Colombia, right? And again, it just makes the brand. And it was an interesting point that Barrington made about the jobs, and then that Will made about the product itself, right? It makes the brand, and it creates its identity. So to which extent is identity important, and how many brands can there be, right? Because right now there are so many brands because of the many limitations, and everyone claims that they're leaders in their territory, and it's kind of true, but you know, how many can, you know, remain leaders and remain in existence after we see an internationalization and consolidation of the industry?
Well, I think the answer is you know, actually, we don't know, because you're not simply trying to replace somebody else on the shelf that's currently there. I mean, you're essentially creating an entirely new category, entirely new shelf space. It's almost like how probably Steve Jobs felt with Wozniak in his garage, and all of a sudden you had the technology and the consumer awareness, and you just had to bottle it up. And as Barrington, everybody's been saying, a brand is basically a way for a consumer to connect and experience. And if you can deliver that to them first and do it in a very differentiated new way, then you can capture their mind for that experience. For example, you can't have a Coca-Cola in New York taste different than Hong Kong. It doesn't work. And so you have to have brands that deliver the same experience all the time. And that's where we're going here. That's where we're going. So, you know, it's an interesting time for that question, but you know, what did Steve Jobs think at the time? If you ask consumers, would they buy an iPhone, a MacBook, an iTunes, or this and that, they wouldn't even know it existed. Couldn't even tell you would I buy it or not. And so I think people fail to recognize just how many categories there are to win here. And as we sit here today, not one brand has anything won. Nobody's won anything. Maybe GW Pharma has some case on some things, but you know, the reality is no brands have won anything. And how exciting is that to know that you don't just have to compete to beat somebody, you get to create category.
That's right.
That's what we're in this for.
Still wide open.
Wide open. What an exciting time if you're an entrepreneur watching this and you're building a brand.
Mm-hmm.
If you dream it, if you think it's helping somebody, if it's making somebody's life better, go for it. Go for it. You can still win. All this conversation we're having right now is so micro. Hey, let me tell you about the macro equation. Things are going to happen in November. More people than ever are sitting on the sidelines saying, I need to create yield. Where can I go? There's cash flow, there's assets, there's jobs, there's all this great stuff. It reminds me of, you know, alcohol prohibition. Go back and look at 1918 and 1933. It looks very similar, and people are being heard, and this is what they want. And so all of a sudden, these bigger forces come in. Okay, so if you're watching this out there right now, if you're a fund manager like me and Will, or you're running markets like Barrington, or running companies like Wayne, you're media like Javier, hey, let me just tell you, the game hasn't even started. You talk about 2.0, maybe if this is baseball and there's 9 innings, we still got 7 more to play. Okay, we got 7 more to play.
Yep, batter up.
So early. Across all public cannabis companies, Barrington, you may know this number and you may disagree with it, but I'm just going to tell you it's the truth. Less than 5% institutional support across all public cannabis companies' cap tables. Okay,
Mainly
that's
retail.
not a whole lot.
No, this is a retail. It's a retail-driven market.
It's retail. You need strong support on these cap tables, and they're about to open up after these elections. It doesn't matter what happens. institutional resources have been waiting for that moment. They're going to come in and it's going to change the game. Now, it's going to take time. I agree with Will. And the more time that it has, the better, because it needs to be done right. And the bigger we get as an industry before they come in, the better for everybody. So hopefully it takes more time, but they're coming. They want this. And when they do, we need to be prepared. We need to be together and ready for it, because it's going to change. It's going to change.
We have to take care of, and I'm pointing at the U.S., you got to take care of the legalization and the banking. And
yeah,
I mean, banking, okay, we talked about this again. For our audience and our listeners, we had a great wrap talk, pre-call talk. So yeah, banking exists, banking is there, but it's not just in the U.S. that's affected. If there's any currency tied to the U.S. dollar in Jamaica and Colombia and wherever, then it's going to affect that business and that industry. So once banking gets settled, once it becomes legal, this changes the game. Like Matt said, what we're looking at today is going to be irrelevant. It's going to be irrelevant.
It hasn't been written. Yeah. People are still up in arms. It's like, listen,
absolutely.
If you look 5 or 10 years from now backwards, not one thing that's happened in this industry is relevant in comparison to what's about to happen. Yep. That 5% number, Barrington, look, if you have Fidelity, for example, I'm telling you, they're getting pressure from a lot of clients. Why can't I get exposure to this industry? Is there any product for me? They want to do it. If Fidelity opens up their platform that much, okay, you're talking about a 16 billion revenue industry. Look at the multiples. I mean, basically that door opening that much probably doubles the real cash equity this industry's seen in the last 20 years from one small movement. And so when it happens and how, we don't know. But Barrington, you're right. It hasn't started yet, it feels like, and you got to be ready for that moment.
I was talking with James. I was talking with James Parker, formerly of MedMen, and we're on a panel, and it's like, well, what do you think is going to be the biggest factor, or the one key factor that'll have the biggest impact on the industry? And he's like, borders, U.S. state borders, where you can travel, and you can ship, and you can move. Opening borders will have a bigger impact on the industry than anything you have ever seen.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so
isn't it amazing? So, go ahead, Wayne.
Okay, so I agree with everything you're saying, Barrington. You're dead on at some of these points, but there's a layer below that or around that, right? That has also to do with the legislative aspect in the country in which you operate, right? I think one of the major, and I don't want to use the word problem, but I'm just going to use it for lack of a better word right now. One of the biggest issues here in Jamaica, in addition to the banking, okay, and in addition to the export regulations, because the export regulations, although the export regulations do exist in a certain form, they're not really export regulations per se. A lot of things can be done by ministerial order and so on and so forth, right? But it doesn't quite open the borders, right? And but there are other things too, such as your foreign ownership restrictions, right? That's a big one, because that will certainly keep the capital out of your local market, the international capital out of your local market, if those foreign ownership restrictions aren't properly managed. For example, okay, in Jamaica, okay, you can only own as a foreigner 49% maximum, okay? That limits a lot of foreign investment coming into the country, because when you compound it with everything else, right? Okay, so I'm going to invest in a cannabis company in Jamaica, but I can't own it. I can't own clear control of it, right? If I make money, I can't bank the money. Okay, and if I grow the crop, I can't send the crop out of the country, right? So it's a compounding effect based on a bunch of different things that are happening. Okay, so legislatively, we have to be able to not just manage, like Matt said, sort of the institutional investors coming in. Okay, but the institutional investors have to be walking into a situation where they know, for example, okay, if we're investing in this, we have the ability to own the asset, operate the asset, okay, bank the money that we make from the product, okay, and be able to sell that product worldwide. And this is one of the major inhibitions in the industry here in Jamaica.
I was just going to comment, Wayne. It's a great setup. Despite all of that, we have a $20 billion almost global industry that's growing at 20% a year.
Agreed.
It's a great time to be putting money into cannabis.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
I think about all of those encumbrances that the industry has right now, and the fighting. I mean, look, we're the guys that showed up way late to this party. So the folks in Northern California, the illicit markets around the world that have been doing really good work. I'm not talking about the criminal element. I'm talking about the health-oriented and service your market element that have paved the way for where the industry is now. Has been paved in a lot of blood and a lot of pain. And yet here we are with a $20 billion industry. So when you start removing some of these other aspects and looking at the states, if you get a banking act, you remove some of the prohibitive taxation that's 280E, you're taxed at a gross profit versus an operating profit line. You start getting openness of transfer of not only capital, but of product. The opportunity is significant on the upside. That said, I'm a big fan of going slowly. I'm not looking to rush anything too quickly. And I'll use New York State as an example. I think there was a lot of consternation around New York not going rec earlier and still not being rec yet, and pushing for maybe this year, although I think in election year it's not going to happen, so maybe next year. And a lot of the holdup was significantly stymied by the inclusion of social equity. And there are a lot of voices in the industry that said, you know, we should have put the pedal to the metal and gone fast, and let's just figure this out later on. The reality is that, as I said, the history of this industry is a very difficult history. And if we go too fast, we're going to step over the opportunity of actually doing reparations and putting money back into communities that have been most harmed by the negative legislation against cannabis and the over-policing of certain demographics in certain communities. And so going slowly and allowing social equity to come into play, going slowly to allow that capital to flow back to those that have been most harmed by the war on drugs, and cannabis has been a mainstay of that focus. That's a great place to actually go slow and do it right. Because here we are with all of these difficulties with a $20 billion industry growing at 20% a year. If we go too fast, we're going to miss the opportunity. The change will come, but we have to do it right.
Well, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. The social equity piece is crucial. It is vital. And if you want to, I guess, shine a light on where the industry has fallen down, in my opinion, and I shouldn't say falling down, could do better, needs to do better. It's with the social equity piece. It's too much of a patchwork. It's too regional. It's just not consistent. And we have to make sure the money goes back to where it needs to go back to. This is an industry based on health and wellness and quality of life, and it's not just for the green. But yeah, I couldn't agree more, Will.
You know, we talk about a lot, Will. I'm so glad you brought this up, Barrington. Amen to you. I'm a God guy, so apologize. But we talk a lot about people in this industry are kingdom builders. Talk about it a lot in the Bible, but I think in this industry, you kind of feel that way, don't you? Because you feel this greater purpose. It's not just the generational wealth that's being created. It's that there's a finite amount of resources in this world. And I think people in this industry are called to basically go get as much of that as possible and redistribute it properly. It's called kingdom building. And I think that's what we're doing. And that's why this is working. And it will be done the right way, because I think we have God on our side. It just feels like that. We could do better in so many areas. But think about all the other big industries that are reverse engineering themselves right now and trying to figure it out. We get to build it right from the first place. That's what's great. So I agree with Will. Let's go nice and slow, because we're in this. I mean, Will came out of retirement. Will was already successful. He didn't have to work again, frankly. You know, I knew him before he did and he came out of this because he believes in it so much. And there's so many people like this at other funds and other great entrepreneurs that are called to a higher purpose. And so we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
States like New York have to go slow. They have to. There's too much at stake, too many lives, too many things. New York State has to go slow. They They can't rush. I mean, yeah, they see the money leaving, going to New Jersey, going to Connecticut, going Pennsylvania. Like they see it. They're sitting there and
Meanwhile,
watching.
I just saw today they opened up indoor dining again in the city. That's pretty good news.
Yeah, that is great.
Hopefully it's good news. But.
You know,
No, it's probably not. I mean, being honest, it doesn't sound like great news. You shouldn't be doing that. If like for anyone watching this,
Here we are.
Javier, you can bring this also back on the social equity piece and the impact to a commercial statement that we were talking about earlier about building brands. I think in this industry, probably more so than any other emerging industry, there is a resonance of responsibility around where you're putting your money as a consumer. I think there's a much deeper connection to the plant. I think that may change over time as it gets more commercialized and you get more distant from the origins of the industry itself. But right now we have a consumer that really cares about what they're getting, who they're getting it from. And so when you talk about, I don't know if Magic versus Isaiah, maybe like the Lakers better than the Pacers, and that's one way to go. But I think the reality is when you start looking at the brands that are being built and you look at the companies that are growing, and I'll use GTI as a public company example, and I'll use actually one of our projects, which is Think Big, which is CJ Wallace connection into Jamaica as well. Authenticity is what builds brands. You want to be authentic to your purpose and authentic to your customer. And I think that the social equity piece should be a cornerstone of every business that's being grown and built in cannabis, because that's where the money has to go back into. And I think when you lose that authenticity, you lose your customer. Yeah. So those companies that have a directed purpose that can bring that messaging and then deliver not only with product, but with stability of business, of jobs, of as Magic was saying, you know, it comes from the US. How about it comes from the communities, or the money goes back into the communities that were most harmed? That type of authenticity resonates, and I think that that's where you build a brand that has a generational legacy.
If you want to take a look at companies, if you want to get to know a company that you're choosing to invest in, one of the things is look how they treat their employees. Look how they refer to their employees. Are they employees or are they family? Are they members of a team or are they in different classes? I remember I was talking to one company and I asked him, the CEO, off the record, it was like, what's your, do you have a social equity program? Like, I don't want to ask you on camera or on film, but do you know, just out of curiosity. And he's like, I don't know. Hold on. And he picked up his phone. He made a phone call. And he's like, I don't know. We work with prisoners and we, you know, supply typewriters and laptops so that they can actually have forms to appeal, mechanisms so that they can write their appeals on, because that was one of the shortages in some of the prisons. He's like, yeah, we supply them with all the machinery, whether it's typewriters or laptops. But I don't think that's really social equity. And I went, yeah, man, you're actually doing it without knowing that you're doing it. He's like, oh no, that's just something we felt that we had to do, and we could. So he didn't even know, wasn't even really aware that he was doing it. And that's the kind of stuff I want to hear. Like, we're doing it and we don't have to, we don't need to, but it's a part of what we do. Get to know the companies and find out. And I mean, the stories are out there. See how they treat their employees, especially during the pandemic. Who's let people go? Who's hired people? Who's kept them on and is making less money, but wants to keep that business going for when the times are good? That's how you build a brand, and that's how you gain customer loyalty, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, authenticity is very important. And, you know, to your last point, one of my pot peeves is when people talk about employees being furloughed during the pandemic. It's like, you fired them, like, call it what it is, just to be clear. But Will, you mentioned Think Big, and I was speaking with CJ and Willie Mack last week, and they told me one thing, that it's, you know, their brand is not a lifestyle brand, it's a way of life brand. And I love that. Again, it's like, it's them being completely authentic about what they want for a brand and what they think people will enjoy. And here's another story I did very recently that really resonated with the public, again, because of its authenticity and all of its commitment. Raekwon from Wu-Tang Clan and Charlemagne the God are invested in this company called Citizen Grow. And what they do is they provide minorities with a full grow kit, and they just go and install it in your house, and then they control the entire grow process remotely. And then they go and pick up the cannabis that you grew in your house and pay you between $1,000 and $3,000 a month for the physical space, that they use to grow the cannabis. And it was one of these stories that I did, and then a lot of other media outlets started replicating it because it resonated so much, because it was authentic, and because his interest was Raekwon's interest was very authentic, but also because there was something more than just making money to the project itself, right? And that is something that I really see a lot in cannabis.
You bring an authentic voice, though, Javier. You're kind of the voice of the industry, I would say. You really call it like it is, man. We all appreciate you.
Very much so. Very much
love
so.
that. I love that.
I wanted to open another debate. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the one thing that's amazing about cannabis, too, is Citizen Grow, that model can go global. Cannabis literally can grow anywhere in the world, from the high steppe down to, Caribbean plains. And the opportunity of distributing a cash crop into marginalized communities around the world. I think we have to do a job with the marginalized communities within the U.S. borders to start. So those operators need to think about inclusion as one of their mainstays. But when you start thinking about a global industry, these are dollars that go into places that you can't grow other things, that you can't have other industry. And so when you think about distributed farming, global trading houses, fair trade practices, just like what Starbucks brought to coffee, you can bring to cannabis. Like, that should be the future. So when you think about how to push money out to areas that otherwise don't have economic development engines, cannabis can be one of those sources.
Great.
Gentlemen, I'm just going to ask that you just give me 30 seconds here, because I just arrived at this location before this call, and I just have to plug in. Okay, so just give me a second. Let me just grab my my power cord, please.
Okay.
No
just
problem.
give me one.
Javier, what are some main topics you think we should cover before we, I think we have about 30 minutes here. Let's
we need to go into the Q&A for the last 15 maybe. So I would like to touch on two things. One is very capital markets related, but before that, just open a brief debate. Maybe we can do a lightning round. We were debating this need to go slow. And I always like to talk about this specifically because I see a lot of people in California and Canada always complaining about the regulations and how they're not quite right. And of course, we rolled them out and we didn't know what we were doing. It was the first time we were doing it. And we built on it. And there's two valid arguments. One is we need these systems in place now because people are suffering and dying today. And there's, they can't wait for another 3 years for a law, right? So talking about something like New York, what's the right decision to make, right? And who does it impact and why are we deciding, right, to go fast or slow? Because if going slow is only to get a good market in place, then shouldn't we regulate home growing in the meantime? And that is one of the largest issues that has transcended to Latin America. Cannabis being deemed an essential service in North America translated into a hashtag and trend down here called Cannabis Esencial, essential cannabis. But our cause underlines the need for home growing, because cannabis is not readily available for patients down here. And because the risk of recurring to illicit providers really surged during the pandemic, a lot of people had to, had to go without their medicine. So where's the balance in legislating slow versus fast, right? Like, and how do we avoid the suffering in the meantime?
Someone's going to have a more micro deep answer for you, but at macro level, what we try to tell because we have probably 40 companies we're involved with now. And what we try to say, be focused on where you are, live in the moment, be present, because all the answers are there. Everything's there if you actually just listen. It's there, but be focused. Be focused enough in the moment to realize that the past is data. Everything in the past is data. Understand that data. How you got to this moment, what does it mean? And then use that to have faith in your future. But be in that moment, because if you miss the moment, it's not even worth the journey anyways. Pay attention. But the reality is this industry, as Will said, is moving at 20% a year on a compound annual growth basis. Some people say 35, but it's good. It's as good as anything. And so it's already going. If you go too fast, that's bad. It could be bad for you. You could move too fast and ruin something really good. If you go too slow, then you could miss that moment too. But if you pay really close attention to it, you're going to be just fine. It is moving. Unfortunately, in the early days, if you look at the first 5-6 years of cannabis, it's eerily similar to most emerging industries in that first run. And it goes up, 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 down, up, down, down. And it eventually gets to a point, they all do, and then they go down. And that doesn't mean the industry's not going to be good. Happened to the internet. Same thing. Okay, you had the same thing, and the internet's done nothing but go up ever since that one big, you always have the big up, the big down, and the big up, always, in different ways. And in Canada, it's human nature. You know, people talk about the markets as a test of psychology. It is. It really is. Look at the, you know, Elon Musk lost like what, $16 billion yesterday? I mean, come on. You know, so this is crazy. The markets are almost like that in many ways. It's a test of psychology. And in the early days of cannabis, you were trading agriculture businesses at 100 times revenue. Look at Tilray, for example. Tilray did a nice revenue number a couple years ago, was a multi-billion-dollar market cap company. And then a couple years later, actually increased revenue. What, Javier, you know better than me, but 4 times increase in revenue, but yet their market cap was 350. And so arguably that's where it should have been valued at the beginning. So even though you have this growth, don't outpace it. Pay attention to it. Stay within the authentic nature that this industry is allowing you to grow, and don't try to get ahead of it and don't get behind it. Just pay attention to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Javier, I think it's important to, as cannabis legalizes around the world, that everyone listens to what each local market is asking for and demanding. And so you need to be sensitive to that. But I think at a base level, it'd be wonderful to say that cannabis is a human right. When you look at what happened in Mexico, the Supreme Court deemed that you should have access as an individual to cannabis. And again, the regs behind that, how to implement that, is just caught up in the political machine that is, you know, any developing nation government process. But as far as having access to the plant, having access to a medicinal, I think that should be a human right. It's not a threat to the commercial side. The commercial side will be, whether it's CPG or medical, is going to take its own path. Yeah. And I think in the end, it's just, you have to be sensitive to what each country, each jurisdiction is asking for and wants. Some communities, frankly, don't want to have cannabis. They've been harmed by cannabis. It's been an over-policing opportunity. They don't want to have dispensaries in their neighborhood. But maybe the profits that come off of cannabis that go into a tax pool, some of that should be segmented to go back into those communities. Maybe it should be a low-cost development fund, an SBA specific to that community that wants to develop a grocery store, a dry cleaner, something that the community needs that doesn't have to be cannabis related. So there has to be a sensitivity around it. But as far as access and opportunity, there's no reason that this plant has been regulated other than very deliberate and horrific politics over the past. And it's a time to open that up.
Last topic I wanted to touch on before moving to the Q&A, when we have several questions from attendees. One of my favorite stats, because it's a real stat and not an estimate, and you know, to the extent where we can track, my friends at Viridian Capital Advisors track deals, M&A, capital invested into the industry and different forms of transactions. And what we've seen year to date this year is that money invested into the cannabis industry is down 70% when compared to last year, over like the same period last year, right? So year over year, 70% down. That's a lot. However, there were 2 big mechanisms that I really want to talk about that I've noticed in a certain extent kept the ball rolling. One are SPACs, special purpose acquisition corporations, and the other mechanism are sale leasebacks. And I don't have a specific question. It's just, you know, a kind of what's going on kind of conversation, a trend talk. 2 of the hot issues, you know, what are your takes on it? And maybe Wade, and we can go Wade, Barrington, William, Matt.
Okay, sorry, you cut out there at the last minute. what was the last part of the question that you just asked?
Yeah, no, there's no real question. What's your take on capital being down so much?
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
the
All right.
emergence of these two mechanisms is sort of
All right.
a viable option.
Yeah, I can give you, sort of the, my experience from the jurisdictions in which I operate, right? And I touched on this briefly before. What has happened in Jamaica specifically is that a lot of the majors have left Jamaica, right? That was a lot of people saw that as a bit of a bad sign, that it had something to do specific with to Jamaica. I don't necessarily believe that. I think a lot of the majors left Jamaica simply because there was the liquidity within the industry started to dry up a little bit. And I think a lot of people just wanted to get back to their core jurisdictions and their sort of their core competencies instead of spreading their wings, and spreading their assets, just so widely, right? I think a lot of people came into Jamaica, as Barrington said from the beginning, simply because Jamaica has a reputation, okay? Jamaica has a national brand. Okay, I've been fortunate that I've been able to travel all over the world, and every time I open my mouth and I say I'm Jamaican, usually the first question I get is, "Wow, I heard that you have some really good weed there. Is that true?" So there is a national brand to Jamaica. So cannabis opened up. What happened is a lot of companies decided, you know what, we're going to go where that national brand already exists. So we're going to go to Jamaica. And I've talked to people who have had, we've got 5,000 acres, we've got 1,000 acres, and so on and so forth. But this goes back to the previous question of, how fast do you go? How slowly do you go? Right? So I think, for Jamaica, what has happened is a lot of liquidity for financing or funding coming into Jamaica has dried up, and I think a lot of that has to do with the misconception that a lot of the majors left Jamaica because, Jamaica is in some way a failure or it didn't live up to its expectation. Where I think it's mostly, having to do with the fact that a lot of these majors left because the industry in general started to consolidate and they kind of had to pull back. And since this was probably the jurisdiction of their slowest growth, just because of some systemic issues in Jamaica, none of which are necessarily bad, but again, it has to do with how fast do you go? Do you trip over yourself, right? And I think that kind of gave it a bit of a bad connotation, if that, sort of answers the question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, it's one of the other trends is like divestment of non-core assets. And what happened, I think, in Jamaica with the majors, like the larger companies, is they invested expecting to capitalize on exporting the Jamaica country brand, and that didn't materialize as fast. Same as it happened in Colombia, and same as it happened in Uruguay, same as it happened in South Africa, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and everywhere else where people hoped to do something like this. And it's, cannabis is a long game. And people ask me, what should my investment horizon be? Even for public stocks, especially for public stocks. And I go like, 5 years, man. You cannot be trading this. This is not going to realize or materialize as fast as we thought. And the migration is not like overnight people will pivot from illicit markets to legal markets and drive revenue growth of 1,000% per quarter, like everyone, like what at first people expected or the market seem to anticipate. Back to the question, sales and leasebacks, and
so
Barrington.
So one of the things that I've told people is when it comes to sale leasebacks, please read the fine print when you see a press release. Fine, okay, you sold your land for X millions of dollars, and now you're going to rent it back from whoever you sold it to for a lot less. How long, if you do not see the terms of how long the length of that contract is on the press release, it is a red flag. I am telling you, just don't fall in love with the initial sale. Do not fall in love with the initial sale. Please look at the terms. As far as monies that were coming in and the financings that were raised and all of that in the cannabis world, we were seeing hundreds of millions of dollars before. Now you have phase two. The companies that are looking to raise money are actually being intercepted by the ones already listed. Companies that are looking to go public are being scooped up before they can actually make it to the finish line, which is great as an industry. I mean, sucks as an exchange because you want these companies to go public, But the companies that are buying them or acquiring them are already public. And so they're growing. We're helping to fulfill our end of the bargain of them becoming and growing and becoming a large public company. So money is not really disappearing. It's just evolving. It's just growing. So that's where we see. And as far as the SPACs are concerned, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to point to Matt, whichever side he's on, because I want him to talk about it, because I know he's got a lot to say.
Want to take it, Matt?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I was going to Will next.
We can switch.
Okay. Pivot on the fly. Barrington, thank you. I mean, look, SPACs are great. They can do really great things, and they have, and people use them wisely. Some people really wisely. But if you look at SPACs, you know, they had the ability to go find a deal for 24 months, and if they don't, the investors who had committed that capital are able to, you know, not put that capital to work. They have no downside other than some operating costs, which can be expensive, but they have the right to pull out. They're in many ways like a fund without committed investors. So when you see a SPAC that has 150, 100, 250 million, that may be the case. Of course it's the case. People committed that, but you have to really find out how committed are those investors. And if you find investors that made that commitment before Corona, life can change, and you need a certain percentage of those people to agree to do the deal 2 years later. And so I think when these things get there, you may find that some folks have a different situation. They're great, but just really ask that question if you're dealing with a SPAC. Make sure you're comfortable that the support's there if the deal's right, because the deal could be right. Maybe someone uses it for a valuation metric or something else for another deal, and then they don't do the deal. I've seen it happen too many times, so pay close attention there. In terms of, well, let me jump back to Will, because I know Will has got some things to say too, but that's on SPACs. Just really pay attention to them, but, you know, understand how they really work. Yeah. And there's fundamental things that you can just study that'll make you, you know, think about them a little differently.
So I'll just throw a couple shots. One on the sale-leasebacks and growth of companies like IIP. If you think about the origin of this industry, any operator that was setting up a cultivation site, you couldn't lease that facility. If you had a facility that was backed by a mortgage to Bank of America and the landlord was looking at you, you weren't a tenant. You weren't available to be a tenant. Yeah. So many of these companies had to raise $10, $15, $20 million just to buy the facility itself. So the rise in sale-leasebacks, it's an opportunity for all these companies that put a huge amount of big iron into the ground to get that capital back. Terms are incredibly important, like Barrington's saying, because you're getting the money back, but you're then paying a rent. So if you don't have a terminus point, if you can't buy it back, there are a lot of things that can go into that. So as an operator, you have to be aware of it. But the trend is just, it's a release of capital that had been just stuck in the ground because of the way the industry was built. So normal to see that trend. And I think it's going to exist for a while because investors like the idea of having a growth industry that continues to have real estate come out and have a defensible and stable income that comes off of that. So it makes sense. SPACs, like Matt said, you know, a lot of blind pool capital that was raised at the height of the market, they're all terming out right now. So I'd be really aware of the SPACs that are getting done right now because you're at the end of your life and there's some really good deals that are getting done. And I'll put Clever Leaves out there. We're an investor in Clever Leaves. We love that company. But there are also a lot of SPACs that are just terming out and just need to put that capital somewhere. And so as a SPAC investor, I think you have to be really aware about what's coming through your SPAC and what you're voting on to either stay in or get out. Yeah. The overall cycle, you know, we've all been living a bit of a desert on the private capital side for the last year. You know, coming out of the end of 2018, there was this huge promise of cannabis, a lot of speculation. October 2018, of the 27 RTOs and IPOs that went public, 3 or 4 months later, when you had those first quarter earnings come in, I think only one was above its IPO price, and now I think they're all below. So I think that it was the promise of cannabis on inflated earnings that never came through that completely blew up the market. So we were looking at sort of the doldrums of 2019 turning into what we hoped was a better market in 2020. And I think at the beginning of the year, I said, this is going to be the best year to put money to work in cannabis. I will stand by that. Because I think if you find a company today that you're investing in, whether public or private, that survives, it's going to be the leader in its category or among the leaders in its category that's going to win long term. So this is a great time to be investing, whether it's public or private.
And,
But that whole cash machine of investing privately, a quick IPO, that money coming back out and going into the private markets, seized. And so even as a fund trying to raise blind pool capital, it's been incredibly difficult. You're going to people that are also facing the COVID whipsaw of the public markets that used to have very high priced non-cannabis legacy stocks, taking profits there and putting into cannabis and speculating. That ceased. So we're in a bit of a doldrums. We have the elections coming up. Everyone's sort of sitting to say, what's going to happen and where's this going to go? It doesn't matter who gets the White House. It doesn't really matter who gets the Senate or the House. It just matters that we're beyond that point, because stability will be at least established. You'll know what you're betting against. And I think that the first quarter of next year is going to be a really robust time to see some of these companies that have weathered the storm to hit the CSE or hit the NASDAQ and go public with a great story that they've been able to grow through this completely, downtrodden desert and show not only revenues, but real profits. So that cycle, I think, will begin again, hopefully not with the same sort of, high burn euphoria, but more of a long, stable slope going forward. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity for all of us.
This is the realistic valuation time. This is where you de-risk it and you bring institutionals in. But like Will said, it won't be till November. That's the key. You have to pay attention to November. And as Will said, it doesn't matter who wins. You just want to know what direction you have to run and how fast for the next 4 years, because this thing ain't lasting 4 more years, I promise you. So you just want to know. And this is the same thing that's happening to all the people we're talking to. As fund managers, guess what? All we do is represent entrepreneurs. And my, are we encouraged. We get to go talk to these massive institutional players and say, yes, you want to be, and I hate to tell you this, but it doesn't matter if you're running a REIT, a SPAC, a consumer brand, a grow, you're high risk, high return to every large investor in the world as a category. It doesn't matter how much you try to de-risk it. As an industry, we have to de-risk it altogether. And as a fund, like Will and I, and some of the other funds that go out, we're talking to these massive allocators and they're this close. They're that close. They went in so bad. If cannabis didn't become more interesting because of all these we talked about today, I can promise you this, half of the other asset classes in this world became less interesting. So by default, we became more interesting to everybody. It's coming. Nobody wants to make a move before November. I've been hearing this since April and May. Mexico moved things back until December. All this stuff got moved back up from Corona. You would have seen a lot more happen, but now it's going to time out perfectly with the election. Okay. It's coming. Wait for it. November is a massive inflection point. Pay attention to it. And thank you, all you entrepreneurs and all of you investors, for supporting us, because now is our moment. I promise you, we're fighting this battle for you to make our lives great. And it's about to open up. Pay it close attention. I promise. Will's right. A flurry of activity. First quarter 2021.
Matt, I want to jump up. I want to jump up from Matt's energy. I just feel.
I think we all do.
Let's so go invest.
We want to work for you. It's like we're fighting for you every day as fund managers. I mean, you make us so excited. You can't wait. Thank you.
Between Matt's energy and Barrington's soothing voice, I'm not really sure which way to go here.
It's sativa, that's the whole thing. This is a hybrid.
When I was talking with people, more so earlier, late 2019, there was a big cannabis conference called MJ Biz. Takes place every year. This year was in December in Las Vegas. They're like, well, what's 2020? It's the year of the balance sheet, man. That's what it is. It is the year of the balance sheet. It was the put up or shut up, and that's how it's going to go. And to Will's point and Matt's point, nothing has changed. That's what you're seeing. Nothing has changed. COVID, Corona, pandemic, work from home, all of those things. It hasn't changed. Put up.
Support great entrepreneurs like Wayne and folks that are driving businesses with authenticity. Support the public companies that are doing a great job. They're public for a reason. Great access to low cost capital, but they're driving a mission statement. Most of them are still driving a great mission statement, and you just have to do your homework. And for those that are private investors, support the funds. We're out there. This is 100% our job. We're spending all of our time in cannabis, speaking with entrepreneurs, trying to understand the markets, trying to understand the evolution of different countries. Looking at Jamaica and looking at the Caribbean, there's so many great opportunities. If if the island nations can get together as a block, and if you think about it as an investor, if I can go and not just invest in Jamaica, but I can invest in Jamaica and St. Lucia and Trinidad and Tobago, and I can have the same sort of set of parameters and rule of law, that's a huge opportunity when I know that my capital can not only go in, and it's backed by Commonwealth or US type statute. I don't have to go very far beyond that to feel very secure. And then when I think about if those nations as a block, they already have a trading block, can figure out cannabis on an export basis to the rest of the world, as well as developing the varietals in the local markets, which I think both local domestic consumers as well as tourists want to taste the terroir. This is like wine. You want to do the rum tour, but do it as cannabis in Jamaica. Like, yeah. If the governments can get together and get that right, then I can get my money out. Yeah. And so getting in and getting out is super important. And that allows entrepreneurs who have great ideas and great businesses and great authenticity to seek capital from us, because we know that we can get in, we can drive those businesses. We stand behind the entrepreneurs to accelerate their vision. We're here to be accelerants of ideas. And we just need to have a framework that makes sense.
You actually walked us into our first question from the audience, and it's how much interest is there from foreign investment markets in the medical cannabis markets in the Caribbean. So, I mean, let's try and do like a lightning round, like maybe 20 seconds each, just go, so we can go through some of the questions. How much interest are you seeing in the Caribbean?
For myself, the interest has died down. And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, simply because I think a lot of the majors left, and there was a supposition that they left because the region itself was a failure. But I don't think that is it. I think, part of it is, and Will just put it perfectly, the region needs to get together, figure out a plan, okay, execute that plan, and have that plan open to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think my thinking would be that, as Will said, and is Wayne the winner in Jamaica? Maybe. I hope so. Sounds like it. But if I went to investors and said, I don't know if it's Wayne or if it's Doug or this person, that person, this person, but as a strategy, can you buy into the theory that Jamaica is going to be good at this for a long time? Hard to argue. So then, as Will's talked about, let's build a strategy around that. Let's go put money in lots of places. Let's think about everybody. How do we move this forward? And as a strategy, now you can de-risk it enough to get capital back into the market. And that's what's going to happen. People are building strategies. They're de-risking this. That then convinces institutionals to move into a high-risk environment, and then everybody wins. But it can't be done individually. You got to do it together.
Yep. What about Mexico? You see it. Next question. Do you see Mexico as a key player in the cannabis industry in the near future? Yes. Why or why not?
Mexico is the three-tiered layer cake. They are going to have a domestic medical market. They're going to have a domestic recreational market, and they're going to be an export nation. I think that the thing everyone's waiting for Mexico right now is just, what are the regs?
Yeah.
So how is cannabis going to be cultivated? How's it going to be taxed? How's it going to be distributed? And how's it going to be exported? So it's all a matter of, like almost every other developing nation, how do you just put the regs behind the law?
Yeah.
And also, Mexico also has a reputation for creating some fairly superior strains of cannabis as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they will be a world player.
Flip side is criminality. Mexico can be scary that way. So again, government has a role, and frankly, all nations have a role of making sure this is a highly regulated market, that the criminal element stays out, and that we're dealing with the best operators that have clean track records.
Yeah.
I think the thing that Will said earlier could be brought back up, which is the court case. They literally had this happen because the United Nations recognizes humans' right to do what they want if they're not harming anybody around them or anything around them. And in this case, they're not even harming themselves. And so Mexico really has stood for something amazing in that sense, because they recognize the greater human right in their country that supersedes their own law, and good for them.
Yeah.
And let's not forget too, right? Mexico may end up being one of the low-cost producers, right? So that's also going to be, I think, a big factor.
Next one is, how can locals get into the cannabis industry? Because most locals can't afford it. And by locals, I imagine we are talking about non-US, non-Canadian, non-UK locals, right? Locals in developing economies.
It has to be a framework that works. I think in Jamaica, I believe there's a change that you could actually co-op a license. So you could have multiple players going after a single license, and it brings the bar down. I'm not sure if that is still established or if that's gone through, but you have to allow local players to have access to these opportunities. And it all goes through the local governments. So smart people doing smart things. If a government is well led and they have a good policy, they'll figure it out. If there is too much pressure from lobbying groups or folks trying to keep out the local players, you're going to have a mess. So the hope is, as an investor, that we find the good markets that allow for locals to play as well as international players. And I'll also extend that to when we talk about Africa and also Jamaica. We call it the illicit market. We've called it the black market in the past. But when you look at South Africa, for example, the illicit market, the unregulated market is the better way of putting it, is actually an incredibly important economic driver for the low to middle class. And so you have to have space for these traditional markets to still exist alongside the commercial opportunity. And again, good governments will figure it out, and difficult places will have difficulties for long times.
And then another person in a related question: how do we know the right investor? Because that's also true. Not all money is created equal, and you want an investor who will give you more than money, who will give you guidance. So how do you recognize a good investor?
Talk to their portfolio.
That's a good one. Talk to their exes.
Yeah, no, and it's a great question because, frankly, there was a lot of investors that were in it for a trade, for a transaction, for a trade. And that's not what the industry needed in the early days. You had to be in it for the long game. You had to, like we talked about earlier, be present, be moving at the pace with which the industry allows. And 20 to 35% is plenty. But some people put strategies together that weren't long-term. And now you have investors, a lot of investors, like Will and I. How many deals are we in, Will? And we talk all the time about companies. We go to, when something happens at a company, we're there together. We help figure it out. There's lots of us on that cap table. We're not going to not answer the phone call when there's a fire. We have to. We're in it long equity. So we get to be involved in solutions to problems. You have a lot of smart people in a lot of different ways. So when you look at investors, think about investors who may be there for years and years to come. Yeah. That is probably who you'd like to be involved with.
There's one other aspect that I'd like to add to this. You have to make sure that the investor, that your end games are aligned, right? Because there are investors who are investing in a product called the stock, and there are investors who are invested in a product called cannabis, right? So you have to make sure that when you are assessing an investor, that both of your end games are aligned. For myself, I am in it to develop the industry and the product and in my local markets. Right. I don't, and I'm sure you guys who are around public companies have seen this, you don't need investors who are screaming at you every 2 days for a press release, right? You need investors who are going to support, your operational activities.
Long-term alignment of interest.
Just to reinforce the importance of the investor, when a company goes public on the Canadian Securities Exchange, we require that you have a minimum 150 shareholders. When we say shareholders, we don't mean shareholders. We mean investors. We mean people that are with you. It's not, I have a board lot, therefore I'm an investor. No, it's people that are going to take the journey with you, and that's on the company. That's on the company to know. But there is a big place for investors, both publicly and privately.
I'm going to take just one last one because we're over time. One person asks, is it a good time to start a cannabis farm? And is it better to do it indoor or outdoor? Of course, my response would be like, it really depends on where you are and if we're arriving first or not. But one thing I got to tell you from speaking with thousands of operators, it's not easy. It's a headache after another headache, after a massive headache, after a migraine, after another headache. And just so you know, all while one of your legs is broken, right? You just broke it playing soccer or whatever. So like, keep that in mind. And I was talking about this with a friend yesterday, and it's like, it's tough. People thought it would be fun to grow weed. Guess what? It's hard as hell. And it's hard to make money of it. Yeah, like at least for the time being. So that is my take. Last question for all of you. Is it a good time to start a cannabis farm or not?
I'd say the question is, where is the unmet need? If you're in an area that has no farms and you're going to be the only producer, great. If you're going to be the 10th or 100th person doing it and there's a biomass market that's dropping to the floor, no. I think you need to look at your local market first, because the export market's really difficult to access. And say, where's your unmet need? If you're addressing an unmet need and you have a competitive advantage and you have a good team behind you, great. That's your question.
Yeah, I agree with Will. I agree with Will 100%. I mean, it all depends on where you are and what your intentions are in the long term, right? The unmet need, I think, is a huge determinant. You know, because again, you know, having, you know, existed where I exist here in Jamaica, you know, I've seen a lot of people come into this business because they think, hey, if we grow Jamaican weed, they will come, right? It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, again, this is all the time we have. Doug, CanEx team, thank you for putting this together. Thank you for having us. You know, Barrington, Will, Matt, Wayne, thank you so much for your time, for your insight.
Good to see you guys again. Thank you. Barrington, Javier, good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Matthew, Will, pleasure to meet you guys.
Cheers.
And thank you to
stay
the audience as well.
Okay, God bless everybody. Thank you.
All right, all the best for now.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.